Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. This incident happened in the summer of 2023. I took a small part, but the real star was my landlord. A small background. It's common in my country to have apartment buildings next to houses, yard and all. I live in one such building. It has 10 apartments, 2 on each of the first 4 floors, 1 on the ground floor and 1 on the top floor. The top floor is used by the landlord when he and his family come for vacations. He lives abroad. The rest are rentals. We also have a small backyard with a side entrance, important for later. Next to the building is an empty lot, also belonging to the landlord. We use it as private parking space with signs clearly saying it's private. It fits 10 cars, 1 per apartment, and has the side entrance. Also, I was the longest tenant, so I was the superintendent. My job was to be the liaison between the tenants and the landlord and communicate any problems and concerns to him. The problem started when the house across the street from us was sold. A lovely old lady used to live there, but when she passed away, the house fell into disarray, especially the large yard. The new owners were Brad and Melissa, fake names, but they lived up to the stereotype. They immediately began major renovations, which was acceptable, but they also started parking their cars in our 2 empty spots. 1 for the landlord and 1 for the lady on the ground floor who didn't own a car. At first we would tell them they were reserved spots and they would move their cars, but when they noticed the spots remained empty, they parked there permanently. I had notified the landlord and he told me to take pictures, log every incident, and always notify the police. We started doing that every day. "Why do you keep calling the police on us?" Brad shouted one day after an officer handed him a ticket. "These spots are always empty." "Because they're private property," I explained. "They belong to our building." "Oh, please," he scoffed. "Nobody's using them anyway." Brad is a hotshot local businessman, and every time we called the cops, he would cause a scene about us being jerks. He always got a fine, but he very blatantly proclaimed he would not pay. "You think I care about these stupid tickets?" he'd say, waving the paper in my face. "I can afford 1,000 of these." The worst part came about a month before the landlord's annual visit. They stopped using one of their cars and left it permanently in front of the side entrance, blocking it. That was a huge issue. You see, the lady living on the ground floor is a renal dialysis patient and 3 times a week goes for a session in the local hospital. The ambulance brings her back and usually parks next to the side entrance because she is exhausted after a session. With Melissa's car parked there, that wasn't doable anymore. I confronted Melissa one morning. "You need to move your car. The ambulance can't get through to help our neighbor." She rolled her eyes. "Not my problem. Tell them to find another way in." They wouldn't move it even when the police were called. I notified the landlord and tried to hold our own hothead from doing anything foolish. The calmer thing he proposed was slashing their tires. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't puncture all 4 tires, my neighbor Marco fumed. "Because that's illegal and they'll know it was one of us," I replied. "Let's wait for the landlord. He'll handle it." Finally, our landlord, Victor, arrives. I hand him the photos and the logs and he calls Brad over. Victor calmly explains that they are not allowed to park in our space and to move the cars. Brad's response was loud and clear. "Who the hell do you think you are? I can park anywhere I want." "This is private property," Victor stated calmly. "These spots belong to the building." "Look around you," Brad sneered. "Do you know who I am in this town? Nobody tells me where I can and can't park." Now, Brad thinks himself as a big fish in our small town, but Victor is a big fish in a major foreign city, and he is very creative when somebody pisses him off. He tells us to leave the spot next to the side entrance open for the weekend and he will take care of things. "Just trust me," Victor said with a glint in his eye. "I have a plan." We do that, and Brad parks his car next to his wife's. Sunday evening, a tow truck arrives and unloads an old Volkswagen Beetle, also known as the Bug, blocking both of their cars. Monday morning, I wake to the buzzer, and when I go downstairs, Brad and Melissa are there. They are both livid. They can't move either car. Victor joins me, all smiles. Brad sees him and blows a gasket. He starts shouting and cursing. "What the hell is this?" Brad yelled, pointing at the Beetle. "Move this piece of junk right now." Victor, still smiling, replies, "I don't see a problem. My car is legally parked. What are you going to do about it?" "You think you're so clever," Melissa hissed. "You can't just block us in like this?" "Funny, that's exactly what you've been doing to our tenant who needs medical transport," Victor countered. Brad angrily gets into his car and reverses into the Beetle, crushing them both. Victor's smile became one of a shark. He immediately called the police. He pressed charges against Brad. "You just deliberately damaged my property," Victor said calmly, filming the whole thing on his phone, "and I have it all recorded." The aftermath. Victor had legally bought the Beetle from his cousin that owns a car repair and restoration shop. The car was a restoration project and was insured. The court found Brad liable for the damage done. They also found out he was true to his word and hadn't paid any of the tickets. The fines for the tickets alone were almost €2,500. He also leased both his cars, and they dropped him as a client immediately for purposefully causing an accident and damaging the leased car. They sued him for damages. Brad got another car, but learned his lesson and hasn't parked in our spots ever since. How much did the whole thing cost him in the end? I asked Victor later. He laughed. Let's just say it was the most expensive parking spot he'll ever use. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few months ago and I'm still laughing about it. I live in one of those neighborhoods with an HOA that thinks they're running their own little kingdom. You know the type. They measure your grass with rulers and send violation notices if your mailbox is the wrong shade of beige. The whole thing started because I work night shifts at the hospital. I'm a nurse, and my schedule has me working 3 12-hour shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Then I have 4 days off. It's actually a pretty sweet deal once you get used to sleeping during the day, but apparently my schedule was causing some serious drama in the neighborhood that I had no idea about. See, I'd come home around 7:30 in the morning, sometimes 8 if traffic was bad, and I'd usually be pretty beat. I'd grab the mail, maybe do some quick yard work if needed, then head inside to sleep until around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Normal stuff, right? Wrong, apparently. The first sign of trouble came when I started getting these passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox. Nothing official, just handwritten complaints about my unusual hours and how I was disrupting the peaceful morning atmosphere of our community. I figured it was just one cranky neighbor and ignored them. Big mistake. Then I started getting actual HOA violation notices. The first one claimed I was loitering on the property during non-residential hours. I had to read that thing 3 times because it made absolutely no sense. Non-residential hours? It's my house. I pay the mortgage. But according to the notice, residents were expected to maintain appropriate schedules consistent with community standards. I called the HOA office to ask what the hell that even meant, and the woman on the phone explained that several neighbors had complained about my suspicious behavior of coming and going at odd hours. She said the board had decided that for community safety and property values, residents should maintain normal business hours for outdoor activities. I told her I work nights, and she said that was my problem to figure out. More notices followed. One for excessive vehicle operation during quiet hours because I drove home in the morning. Another for inappropriate use of exterior lighting because I turned on my porch light when I got home in the dark. The fees were adding up. $25 here, $50 there. I was getting furious, but tried to handle it through proper channels. I showed up to the next HOA board meeting with copies of my work schedule and a reasonable explanation. The board consisted of 5 of the most self-important people you've ever seen in your life. The president was this guy who clearly peaked in high school and now got his kicks bossing around neighbors. He sat there in his little suit looking at my paperwork like I was trying to pull a fast one. He said that while they appreciated my service as a healthcare worker, the community standards applied to everyone equally. He claimed that several neighbors had reported seeing me lurking around the property at inappropriate hours, and that my schedule was creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and concern. I pointed out that I literally lived there and had every right to be on my own property at any time. He responded that according to the community bylaws, any behavior that materially affects property values or community peace could be restricted by board action. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal notice requiring me to adjust my schedule to comply with standard residential patterns or face escalating penalties, up to and including eviction proceedings for violation of community standards. The notice demanded that I be absent from the property between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless I had prior written approval for specific time-limited activities. I stared at this thing in disbelief. They were basically trying to kick me out of my own house during the day because my work schedule annoyed some nosy neighbors. When I asked how exactly they planned to enforce this, the president smiled this smug little smile and said the HOA had various means of ensuring compliance. That should have been my warning right there. 2 weeks later, I'm dead asleep after a particularly brutal shift. I'd gotten home around 8 a.m., finally managed to fall asleep around 9:30, and was in that deep, recovering from exhaustion sleep that you need after dealing with medical emergencies all night. Then my phone starts ringing. I ignored it the first time. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I grabbed it without looking at the caller ID and answered with a very groggy, "What?" The voice on the other end was way too chipper for whatever ungodly hour it was. It was the HOA president, and he was calling to inform me that I was in violation of the community standards notice and needed to vacate the property immediately. I looked at my clock. 4:39 a.m. This maniac was calling me at 4:39 in the morning to tell me I was violating their stupid schedule rule. I told him he was insane and hung up. He called back immediately. This time he was less chipper and more official sounding. He said that according to their records, I had been on the property for over 8 hours without authorization, and as per the community standards notice, this constituted grounds for immediate eviction proceedings. He said I had 30 minutes to vacate, or they would begin formal action. I was wide awake now and absolutely furious. I told him that first of all, it was my house, and second of all, it was 4:30 in the morning, and normal people were sleeping. He said that my non-compliance with community standards had forfeited my right to standard residential privileges, and I needed to leave immediately. Then he said something that made my blood boil. He told me that if I was going to persist in this antisocial behavior, I clearly wasn't a good fit for their community anyway, and maybe I should consider finding somewhere else to live that was more suited to my lifestyle choices. That's when I got the most beautiful, terrible idea. I told him fine. If the HOA wanted me to comply with their community standards exactly as written, then I would comply with their community standards exactly as written. He seemed pleased with this response and said he expected full compliance going forward. I assured him he would get exactly that. The next morning, I started my research. I went through every single page of the HOA bylaws, community standards, and regulations. I read every amendment, every clarification, every ridiculous rule they'd passed in the last 10 years, and I found some very interesting things. See, the community standards document that prohibited me from being on my property during the day had a reciprocal clause. It stated that all community standards applied equally to all residents, and that any resident found in violation of schedule restrictions would be subject to the same penalties and enforcement actions. More importantly, I discovered that several board members had been violating their own rules for years. The president himself had been running a small business out of his garage, which violated the no commercial activity during residential hours rule. Another board member had been doing major landscaping work during the prohibited hours. A third had been having loud parties that went well past the noise ordinance cutoff times. But the really beautiful part was buried in the enforcement procedures section. Any resident could file a formal complaint against any other resident for violations of community standards, and the board was required to investigate and enforce penalties equally regardless of who the violator was. So I filed complaints, lots of them. Formal, documented, carefully researched complaints against every single person who had been harassing me about my schedule. I included photos, timestamps, witness statements from other neighbors who were happy to help once they learned what was going on. The president tried to dismiss my complaints at first, but I had done my homework. I quoted the exact sections of their own bylaws that required equal enforcement. I pointed out that failure to investigate violations by board members would constitute selective enforcement, which was explicitly prohibited and grounds for removal from the board. Within a week, I had documentation of dozens of violations by the very people who had been trying to evict me from my own property. Late-night garage door operations, early morning lawn mowing, vehicles parked in violation of the community standards, commercial deliveries during prohibited hours. The beauty was that, according to their own rules, these violations carried the same penalties they'd been trying to impose on me. Fines, restrictions, and yes, potential eviction for repeated violations of community standards. I submitted a formal request for board action on all documented violations, including a demand for equal enforcement of all penalties. I also filed a motion to have the discriminatory schedule restrictions reviewed by the state HOA Oversight Board for potential fair housing violations, since they appeared to specifically target healthcare workers and other essential employees who work non-standard hours. The president tried to call me to work something out, but I told him I was simply complying with community standards exactly as written. Wasn't that what he wanted? 3 weeks later, I got a letter from the HOA board formally rescinding the schedule restrictions and apologizing for any misunderstanding about the application of community standards. The letter stated that upon further review, the board had determined that the restrictions were overly broad and potentially discriminatory. 2 months after that, there was a special election for the HOA board. Turns out that when you start actually enforcing the ridiculous rules equally, a lot of people realize how ridiculous the rules really are. The old board was voted out almost entirely, and the new board's first action was to eliminate about half of the petty restrictions that had been making everyone's lives miserable. I still work my night shifts, I still come home in the morning, and I still sleep during the day. The difference is that now, nobody calls me at 4:39 a.m. to tell me I'm violating community standards by existing in my own house. The former president moved out about 6 months later. Word around the neighborhood was that he couldn't handle living under the same rules he'd been enforcing on everyone else. Funny how that works. I learned a valuable lesson from all this. When someone demands that you follow their rules exactly as written, sometimes the best response is to do exactly that. Just make sure you read all the rules first. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was working at a Tim Hortons in my youth, think 19, 20 years old, and I prided myself on polite and courteous service. I was always cheerful and tried my best to fill orders promptly. I managed this by telling myself that even the worst customer could just be a normal person on the most terrible day of their life. I usually brightened people's days and saw many grumpy people leave happier because of me, until the Karen came in. I was dealing with a lunch rush, which means for several hours people stream in as if food and drink had never existed and will never exist again. So there were a lot of people to get through. A lot. So under these conditions, the Karen showed herself. She was belligerent, rude, and had a truly massive order to fill. Nothing I couldn't handle. However, she had several drinks ordered, think 8 different beverages, and she had 3 dozen donuts, which is fine, nothing out of the ordinary, but she had to have them specifically in a certain order in the boxes, and this took time as she ordered me about. No problem, I've dealt with weirder things while working there. The line, however, was backing up while I was serving her, and her true colors were starting to show as I filled her order. Then we get to check out. I start to ring her up. She changes her order, 3rd time, again, and wants to add 4 sandwiches. I say, "Ma'am, could we ring the drink and donuts through first? Until I ring you through completely, it ties up a cash register." The Karen screeches, "I won't pay more taxes on my order. You won't cheat me." I stare rather dumbfounded at this logic. I tried to argue with her saying, "Ma'am, this won't increase your taxes. It's just faster." The Karen interrupts, "No, I won't be cheated. You hear me?" And I shoot a deeply apologetic glance at my coworkers who are now regretfully dealing with a crowd with 1 less cash register, then proceed to head to the deli to make her sandwiches as fast as I physically can, so I can get back to the counter. The Karen smugly chides and reproaches me while I make her order, telling me, "You're making the sandwich wrong," and tries several times to order me about as if I were a complete idiot. As I'm finishing my second sandwich for this woman, I'm getting irritated with her attitude. I, still politely, inform her that I have to assemble the sandwiches in a certain order. I even have a physical chart to follow. I could get fired for not following the chart. She harumphs at me, while muttering under her breath about how no one respects their elders anymore, and duck you, and more angrily, idiot, when I am beginning the 4th sandwich. My sunny disposition was leaving me at this point. This woman obviously had no respect for me, thinks I am incompetent, and doesn't care if she insults me. So impulsively, I came up with a plan as I finished up the 4th and final sandwich. Smacking my head, I say, "Oh, I almost forgot." The Karen grumbles, "Forgot what?" I say, "Well, we have a new promotional offer and I almost forgot to ask you about it. You see, Tim Hortons has been doing ergonomic studies and has found that right-handed people and left-handed people hold bags differently." The Karen look interested, so I continue. "So with these findings, they designed ergonomic bags for their customers as a promotional offer. Would you like to participate?" The Karen huffed at me. "Of course I want to participate." I give my best customer service smile and say, "Okay, would you like a left-handed bag or a right-handed bag?" The Karen looks offended. "A right-handed one, of course." I say, "Of course, ma'am," and duck down below the counter to quietly rummage through the completely identical bags I have. I decide to take the whole thing a step further, and I pop back up with a look of pure regret on my face. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We only have left-handed bags left. Is that okay?" The Karen is upset with this turn of events, but does not wish to lose out on the promotion. "Ugh, fine," she says icily, and grabs her order. I ring her through and watch her walk out the door with complete satisfaction in my soul. The added cherry? I heard her complaining about her left-handed bag to her friend as she walked out with her order, and the confused look on the friend's face was priceless as this woman idioted and moaned about this completely made-up problem. I never did anything like this before or since. She was a special kind of a-hole, the Karen with the left-handed bag. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I got hired as a line cook when I got out of culinary school. It was a big hotel chain. I got hired for the day-to-day work, and we had 8 other line cooks and a head chef who was always bragging about his workload and how he spared us from the paper monster. The head chef was, for a better word, absent from the kitchen floor and basically a pencil pusher. He did the ordering, the Hayes CCP lists, stocking, timesheets, rosters, schedules, communication with HR/GM/F&B, and he made the menus. For the most part, the work paid OKE and there was not much hassle. Thing was, the menus we had to cook were outdated and very uninspiring. Like, think about the cookbooks from 70 years ago, uninspiring. At some point, we as a kitchen team were done with that, and we requested that we make the menus. Head chef, for some reason, was happy to oblige. So now comes the kicker. We had a after-hours menu with simple meals, BLT, pizza, salads, soup, fries, hamburgers. For some reason, corporate decided that the after-hours menu had to go and be replaced by the normal day-to-day menu. This led to the following situation. Almost nobody ordered food during the night shift. Turns out when people come to a hotel late, they are either too tired or too drunk to eat a meal that takes around 15 minutes to serve, or are in no mood for a sautéed salmon in white wine sauce. This went on for like a year, and corporate saw the nosedive in the night shift revenue across the board, and they made the only logical decision to combat this problem: fire all night shift line cooks or relocate them to other hotels if they could not be fired. Of course, the after-hours menu was not changed, nor was it removed. No, instead, it meant the shift had to be picked up by another. So this is where the tale really started. So I worked there for about 2 years, and I got in some trouble with the head chef. We didn't see eye to eye. This led to the following situation. I had to pick up almost every night shift. I would come in at 4 in the afternoon and leave around 5 in the morning. I worked 40 hours on paper, but in reality, I worked around 50-ish. I didn't mind as overtime was paid out, and me as a 21-year-old could do a lot with the paid out OT. Things was, it was so boring. In the beginning, I cleaned the kitchen, checked the walk-ins for spoiled goods, set up a part of the breakfast, and did some minor paperwork. After about 3 weeks, I ran out of work to do. Every 2 or 3 days, I could clean something or check the fridges, but what first took an hour now took like 10 to 15 minutes, so I did the logical thing and started reading books, watching Netflix, talked to the night manager, starting to experiment with new recipes, and hanging out with the interns. Basically, I was effing around on company time. So, after a while I got called into the office of the GM. I got a verbal reprimand for slacking. When I asked him why, he told me someone told him what I did during night shift. So I, of course, explained to him what I did and that in between these hours I had little to do. This led to a discussion between corporate GM and my union about what I could and could not do within the position I was hired for, but that's a story for another time. At the end of this whole ordeal, I was tasked with kitchen paperwork, and Chef just unloaded his whole workload on me, telling me to get to work and that the time for slacking was over. He said this all smug, and apparently he was assuming I would not finish this or I would come begging for help. I had to do timesheets, order produce, and answer emails. Chef was always bragging about the work and that it took a whole week. After one look, I knew he was not familiar with computers and the various programs he had to work with. Within a month, I had figured out that our time management system could be linked to our payroll system, and I only had to check if the breaks were logged correctly, hit the sync button, and place a request for validation by the GM HR. Same went for our ordering software. I could upload a produce list and order from an iPad while walking around to the different walk-ins and freezers. Also, I combined this with the 2-day spoil check. Within 2 months or so, I found out that the work schedule sheet could be copied to another week, and with another software link, I could sync our HR app so it would automatically generate a warning when someone was on leave or vacation. It took me 2 night shifts to do all of the above, and the other 3 I could slack. Due to this, Chef had nothing to do in the office and in turn was slacking. He had nothing to do during the day but to sit around in his office. After about 2 months, somebody slipped this info to the GM. After that, Chef had to work in the kitchen and his 9 to 5 changed. He had to do breakfast shifts as he failed to do line cook work. He was stuck 30 years back when sticking everything in jelly was a trend. Soon after this, corporate got wind of this great innovation and asked our chef to document this all and send this over to them. When I left the company due to other reasons, corporate were contemplating cutting the head chef's position and making the F&B manager responsible for the kitchen. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened several years ago. I was a photographer for a major theme park and have dealt with my fair share of entitled Karens Brads. But there's only been one time I've had to call security because of a Karen. I was working with a character one afternoon, and one of the families that stopped by to pay a visit was this family of 3 with mom, dad, and a 5-year-old boy that I'll name Malcolm. Malcolm is strapped to a harness attached to mom's waist. Think those jogging harnesses for blind runners to keep him close to mom and dad. Before the session, Dad pulled the character attendant and me aside and alerted us that Malcolm was a nonverbal autistic and camera flashes were overstimulating to him. Now, this was a pretty common request, so I adjusted my settings so I wouldn't have to use the flash and thanked him for alerting me. It's Malcolm's turn, and he was such a sweetheart. He just wanted to show off the book full of pictures of his favorite dinosaurs, and we all got sad when he had to leave. A few hours later, I was in an area we refer to as backstage, where guests aren't allowed, heading to my break. Imagine my surprise when all of a sudden I get body slammed by Malcolm. For the record, I'm almost 6 feet and 250 pounds, and he nearly managed to knock me over. He's screaming and crying. Fortunately, my manager Oscar was nearby, so I flagged him down and we immediately called security. We get Malcolm to a cool, air-conditioned place as it's 95F, and I looked up pictures of dinosaurs on my phone to show Malcolm. Eventually, he calmed down and he essentially became my little buddy. About 10 minutes later, Malcolm is reunited with a tearful mom and dad. It's there we got the full story. Enter Karen. Mom, Dad, and Malcolm were getting ice cream when Karen approached. The conversation went roughly as followed. Karen: why is he harnessed? Mom: oh, he's autistic and he will bolt if he's not harnessed. Karen: no, he's not. Mom: excuse me? Karen: you're just a bad parent. My grandson knows better than to stray from me, and he's about the same age. Mom: I'm sorry, but he's incapable of understanding that. It's safer for everyone if he is harnessed. It's at this point that Dad comes back with the ice cream and Mom turns her attention away to help him. The next thing she knows, the harness goes slack. When she looked up, Malcolm and Karen are gone. It's so packed that day that it's easy to lose track of someone, especially if it's a running child. An important thing to note is that the park has cameras everywhere, so it was easy to get a video of the incident and get a description of the Karen. Security was alerted and Karen tracked down. She was belligerent and tried to slap the security guard who stopped her, stupidly doing it in front of an OC sheriff, so she got a lovely court date for assault as a result. Malcolm and his family were given an extra day added to their tickets as an apology for what happened, but they just had one request. They asked to know where I would be the next day so I could take their pictures. The next day, I gave them a full-on photo shoot. And yes, it was the best day of my entire career. The next one is an entitled parent story. Female, 23 years old. It's my birthday today, from the Netherlands. Living while hating myself. Looking back, I think what hurt the most wasn't just that my family wasn't proud of me. It was what that represented. It wasn't about a graduation ceremony or a diploma. It was about the realization that no matter what I did, no matter how much I pushed through, it would never be enough for them. When I was younger, I didn't question why I was so independent. My mom would always tell people how I was different from my siblings. While they were glued to their Nintendo DSs, I was buried in books. She found it bizarre. You know, normal kids play games, right? She'd say. But I just loved reading. I loved learning. What shocked her the most was that I didn't need anyone to push me. I did it on my own. Looking back, it made sense. I never really expected guidance because I never had it. I never expected my mom to help me with homework. I never expected her to sit down with me and go through things like other parents did. I never expected anyone to stand up for me at school. That's just how it was. If I needed help, I had to figure it out myself. You don't realize as a kid that this isn't normal, that other kids have parents who advocate for them, who help them through things. You just assume that's how the world works. You do everything alone, and if you struggle, you push harder, because that's what you're supposed to do. But now I realize that it wasn't independence, it was survival. There's a difference between doing things on your own because you want to, and doing them on your own because you have no other choice. I wasn't choosing to do everything alone. I was forced to. When I was 14, 15, I had to make my own appointments with teachers. I had to explain my struggles on my own. And as a POC girl, no matter how well I spoke or how serious I was, they didn't really take me seriously. Maybe some of them wanted to, but without a parent backing me up, there was only so much they could do. And because I had managed for so long without support, the moment I did struggle, the moment I did need help, it was seen as a failure. It wasn't just that I had to redo exams, it was that I had broken the illusion that I could do it all without ever slipping. And to them, that slip made me undeserving. There is something deeply unsettling about growing up in an environment where success isn't a cause for celebration, but failure, no matter how small, is a reason for punishment. Where struggling isn't met with support, but with ridicule. Where a mistake isn't a lesson, but a weapon to be used against you. Where getting an answer wrong isn't just wrong, it's stupid. It's proof that you're not enough, and once that idea is planted, it never really leaves. When I finally graduated, I was the first in my family to do so in a way that allowed me to go to university. You would think they'd be proud. But no, instead of being proud, they still thought I was useless and stupid. When I succeeded, I had to take resits to get my diploma. I was so close, but I needed to redo one exam, then another. My mom, my aunt, my sister, and my brother were furious. They called me useless, a dumbass, told me I would never succeed. They asked me why everyone else managed to pass, but not me. And when I finished my resits and finally succeeded, I was so happy. Yes, I was thin as hell. Yes, I was depressed beyond words, but I did it. I did what I had to do, and I made it. Still, that wasn't enough. Even when I succeeded, my mom wasn't happy. She told me she was mad that she wasn't proud of me, especially not proud of me. When I asked her why, she said, well, you needed to do resits, so get out of my face. She and the rest of my family refused to go to my graduation. Nobody went, I went alone, just like I had always gone through things on my own. This particular moment left an imprint on me. I think this was the moment I truly realized what had been happening all those years leading up to it. No matter what I achieve, no matter if I succeed or not, it will never be good enough. Even if you do things all by yourself because no one will help you, they will always have something to say, but still, no one will help you. Still to this day, acknowledgement from my family never comes. The recognition of the things that happened, of the mistakes that were made, of the hurt that was caused, it never happens. There is no apology, no moment of reflection, no conversation that even hints at accountability, and maybe that's what makes it worse. Not just the past itself, but the silence that follows it, and while they remain silent, my depression only grows louder. But deep down, I know the truth. It was never about me not being good enough. It was about them never being able to see my worth in the first place, and if they never saw it then, they never will. The only person left to see my worth is me, and I'm still picking up the pieces. P.S. Trust me, I'm not some kind of wonder child. I don't think I'm special or extraordinary. I just liked school. I liked learning. I liked developing myself in academic settings, while my siblings didn't. I never needed help with school, and that made it easy for my mom to focus her attention elsewhere. But it also made it easy to criticize me when things went wrong. I was raised by my mother. I had 2 siblings, 1 brother and 1 sister. My father was not around. Well, he was, but in reality, I was the one raising him, rather than the other way around. He was in and out of the picture, mostly for 2 days at a time. And then, gone again. Mind you, they still don't even know what faculty I study at, my favorite color, or who I am as a person. They only know the version of me that exists for them. The people pleaser, the one who does everything they expect, who listens, who nods, who doesn't push back. It's funny how the things that matter to me are completely invisible to them, while I'm expected to listen to everything that happens in their lives and move along with them, and I struggle with that. A lot. PSS. Trust me, I'm looking to move out, but if you know anything about the Netherlands right now, rent prices are through the roof. And again, being raised by a single mother, juggling work and studying, it's tough out here, babes. Anyway.